For nearly a decade, the murky water of an abandoned quarry held the secret of Antonio and Maria, an elderly couple who left home one January morning to view a plot of land and then vanished from the face of the earth. Their daughter, Helena, spent almost 10 years searching for answers until nature itself decided to reveal what lay hidden in the depths of those turbid waters. And what emerged from the depths was more than just a rusted car. It was proof that some cons cost far more than money. The sun had not yet burned away the morning chill when Antonio Sequeira adjusted his straw hat and stepped onto the sidewalk. It was January of 2006, and for decades the 78-year-old retiree's routine had been the same. Wake early, drink strong black coffee, and watch the slow-moving life on José de Alencar Street in the center of Boqueirão, a small town in the Paraíba countryside. Maria das Dores, his companion of more than 50 years, was finishing up in the kitchen when she heard her husband's voice, chatting with someone at the door. At 74, she still carried herself with the erect posture and precise gestures of a woman who had spent her life as a seamstress. Drying her hands on her apron, she went to see who it was. On the sidewalk, Antonio was talking with Joaquim, their neighbor for decades. The subject was always the same: the changes in town, the ever-rising prices, the children who left for the big cities. But on that day, there was something different in the air. Antonio was speaking of a desire he had been nursing for some time. "I'm thinking of buying a little piece of land, Joaquim," he said. "Nothing too big, just a little corner to plant some vegetables, raise a few chickens. This railway pension is enough to get by, but it doesn't allow for many luxuries." Maria listened from the doorway and smiled. She knew her husband better than anyone. Antonio had always harbored a desire to work the earth, even after decades on the rails. It was as if he wanted to reclaim a piece of his childhood on his parents' farm, back in Monteiro. "And where are you thinking of buying, Antonio?" Joaquim asked, adjusting his cap. "I'm not sure yet, but I mentioned it at the market over by Dona Expedita's vegetable stall. Who knows, maybe an opportunity will come up." Her husband's words echoed in Maria's mind for the rest of the day. She had always been the more careful of the two, the one who managed the accounts and guarded every centavo. The idea of buying land didn't frighten her, but she knew they had to be smart. Con artists loved preying on the elderly with their life savings. That afternoon, while organizing her sewing supplies, Maria reached for her blue hardcover notebook, the one held shut by an elastic band. It was an object that went with her everywhere. In it, she noted everything she considered important: bills to pay, phone numbers, doctor's appointments, prescription details. In small but neat script, she wrote, Helena was the couple's only daughter. At 42, she had a settled life in Campina Grande, working as a nurse in the city hospital. She made it a point to visit her parents every weekend. The 60-kilometer distance was nothing to someone genuinely concerned for their well-being. When she arrived the following Saturday, Helena found her parents buzzing with excitement about the potential purchase. Antonio had already calculated how much they had in their savings account, while Maria was listing what they could plant. "Mother, father, you need to be very careful with these things," Helena warned. "There are a lot of swindlers out there taking advantage of people your age." Maria nodded in agreement. "I told your father as much. Any deal that comes up, we'll discuss it properly, check the documents, do everything by the book." Antonio just laughed, adjusting his hat. "Relax, girl. We weren't born yesterday. If something good comes along, we'll take our time." But fate already had other plans for the family. As they talked in their simple living room, surrounded by old furniture and framed photographs, someone was watching the house from a distance, someone who had overheard Antonio talking about land at the market. Someone who saw in the elderly couple an easy way to make money. The first move would come just a few days later when a stranger knocked on the Siqueira's door with a proposal that seemed too good to be true, and usually when something seems too good to be true, it's because there's a problem hidden somewhere. The knock on the door echoed through the house on a hot January afternoon. Maria was at her sewing machine finishing a dress for a client when she heard Antonio get up from his chair to answer it. From the tone of the ensuing conversation, she realized it was a stranger. "Good afternoon, Mr. Antonio. My name is Roberto Lima. I'm a real estate agent from around here." The man at the door looked to be in his 40s. He wore a crisp, light-colored shirt and carried a black leather briefcase. He had the easy, confident air of someone accustomed to persuading people. A quick smile, a firm handshake. "I heard you were interested in acquiring a piece of land. Is that right?" Antonio was surprised. He had indeed mentioned it at the market, but he hadn't expected the news to reach a real estate agent so quickly. Nevertheless, he invited the man in. Maria emerged from the sewing room, wiping her hands on her apron. Roberto introduced himself politely, complimented the tidiness of their home, and then got straight to the point. He claimed to have the perfect lot for what Antonio was looking for. 1,000 square meters near an old quarry with soil perfect for planting and a price well below market value. "The owner is in a hurry to sell, you know how it is," he explained. "Needs to pay off some debts. He's offering it for 15,000 reais. It's a real bargain." Antonio's eyes lit up. 15,000 was exactly what they had managed to save over the years. It felt like destiny was on their side. Roberto opened his briefcase and showed them some papers, a map of the region highlighting the lot, and a pre-filled purchase agreement. It all looked very professional. "Now there's one detail," the supposed agent continued. "The owner is out of town. He'll only be back next week, but if you want to secure the deal, we'll need a deposit, say 3,500 reais. Then when he gets back, we can finalize everything." Maria felt a knot of unease tighten in her chest. It was a lot of money to hand over without seeing the land or meeting the seller. But Antonio was already captivated, imagining the vegetables he would plant, the chickens he would raise. "Is the land far from here?" she asked. "About a 15-minute drive. It's right near the old quarry. You must know it. A very quiet place, far from the hustle and bustle of the city." Roberto suggested they visit the site the following Saturday. He said he would pick them up in his car at 9 in the morning. That way they could see the property and, if they liked it, close the deal on the spot. After the man left, the couple discussed the proposal. Antonio was convinced it was a golden opportunity. Maria, more cautious, took out her blue notebook and wrote down every detail of the conversation. In her neat script, she wrote, "Roberto Lima, realtor, land 15,000, deposit 3,500, Saturday, January 28. Visit at 9 a.m., near the quarry." "Do you think we should talk to Helena first?" she asked. "Woman, the girl is only coming at the end of the week. If we wait, someone else might show up and we'll lose our chance." It was true. Helena would only arrive on Sunday, a day after the scheduled visit, and Roberto had made it clear that other buyers were interested. That night, Maria's sleep was restless. She dreamed of papers scattering in the wind, of a white car driving down dirt roads. She woke up several times, unable to shake the strange feeling that had taken hold of her. Antonio, on the other hand, slept like a stone. He dreamed of tomato plants heavy with red fruit in a yard full of chickens scratching freely in the dirt. He woke up smiling, more convinced than ever that it was time to realize his old dream. On Friday, the day before the visit, they went to the bank. Antonio withdrew the 3,500 reais in cash, tucking it into an old leather wallet he carried in his pocket. Maria organized their personal documents in a folder, just in case they were needed for some formality. Before going to sleep, she made one last entry in her blue notebook. Saturday, Jan 28. Visit land with realtor 9 a.m. Bring deposit 3,500 reais. Ask Helena to take care of everything if something goes wrong. To understand how this story ends and what truly happened to Antônio and Maria is to understand why stories like this must be told, so that other families might be spared the same suffering. Saturday, January 28, 2006, dawned with the dry heat typical of the Paraíba countryside. Maria woke earlier than usual with a knot in her stomach she couldn't explain. She prepared breakfast in silence while Antonio whistled an old tune from his days on the railroad. "Are you nervous, woman?" he asked, noticing she had barely touched her buttered bread. "It's not nerves, Antonio, it's just an unsettling feeling. Maybe we should wait for Helena to arrive tomorrow." Antonio shook his head, placing his straw hat on his head. "Maria, you know the girl will want to meddle. She'll find 1,000 reasons for us not to buy it. It's better to get it done." It was nearly 9 o'clock when Maria changed her clothes. She chose a light blue cotton dress with white buttons down the front, her going-out dress reserved for special occasions. She tied her graying hair into a simple bun and grabbed her blue hardcover notebook. "Why are you taking that?" Antonio asked, watching his wife place the notebook in her handbag. "In case I need to write down something important. An address, the owner's name, things like that." Antonio put on his beige, long-sleeved shirt, the kind he wore for protection from the sun, and a pair of simple dress trousers. In his shirt pocket, he placed the wallet with the deposit money. In his trouser pocket, his personal documents. At 9 o'clock sharp, they heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. Maria peered through the window and saw a boxy white Volkswagen Gol, one that clearly showed its age. There were patches of rust on the side and the tires were worn. Roberto got out of the car and waved. He was wearing the same light-colored shirt as the day before, but seemed more hurried. He greeted the couple briskly and opened the rear doors of the vehicle. "Good morning, Antonio, Donna Maria. Ready to see your new property?" The back seat of the Gol was covered with an old, frayed piece of fabric. The car smelled of stuck cigarettes and had stains that Maria preferred not to identify. Antonio got in first on the right side. Maria hesitated for a moment before settling in beside her husband. "Is the land really far?" she asked, clutching the notebook to her chest. "About 15 minutes, like I said. You'll see, it's a perfect spot." Roberto started the engine, which coughed a few times before catching. The radio played a country song softly. He drove with one hand, the other drumming a nervous rhythm on the steering wheel that Maria noticed but didn't comment on. Donna Francisca, their neighbor of over 20 years, was sweeping her sidewalk when she saw the couple getting into the car. She waved from her doorway, and both Antonio and Maria waved back. Antonio even called out through the window, "We'll be back before lunch, Francisca." Those were the last words anyone would hear them speak. The Gol drove down José de Alencar Street, past the central market where Antonio bought his vegetables, around the main square and headed toward the edge of town. Maria watched the familiar landscape fall away, the simple houses, the yards with their mango trees, the boys flying kites in a vacant lot. After a few minutes, Roberto turned off the main road and onto a dirt track. The car bucked and swayed over the ruts, kicking up a fine dust that seeped in through the window seals. Maria held the notebook tightly, her heart beginning to beat faster with every meter they moved away from the city. "That up ahead is the quarry I mentioned," Roberto said, pointing to a rise in the landscape. From a distance, they could see the gash in the rock, the high, irregular walls where the excavation had once taken place. The water pooled at the bottom glittered under the harsh sun, forming an artificial lake that local youths sometimes used for swimming, despite the dangers. Antonio craned his neck to get a better look. Is that quarry deep? Very. They say it's over 20 meters deep. That's why the land I'm showing you is such a bargain. It's close, but not too close. Just enough for some peace and quiet. The car continued along the dirt track, kicking up more and more dust. Maria noticed there were no more houses nearby, only the dry scrub of the countryside and some barbed wire fences marking rural properties. It was then she realized Roberto was no longer following any road at all. He was simply driving through the scrub, maneuvering around rocks and bushes as if he knew this improvised path by heart. "Where exactly is this land?" Maria asked, her voice betraying a rising anxiety. Roberto didn't answer immediately. He just kept driving through the brush, the goal lurching violently over rocks and holes. The engine roared, straining against the rough terrain. Through the window, Maria could see only low vegetation, cacti, and the dry earth cracked by the sun. "We're almost there," Roberto finally said, but his voice had changed. The polite, convincing tone from the past few days was gone, replaced by something rougher, more hurried. Antonio began to feel uneasy too. This didn't feel like the path to anywhere, much less to a plot of land for sale. It was as if they were being driven into the heart of nowhere, far from any witness, far from any help. "Son," the old man said, trying to keep his voice calm, "I think we should turn back. This doesn't look like any kind of property." Just then, Roberto slammed on the brakes. They were in an uneven clearing, surrounded by low scrub and scattered rocks. From there, they could see the quarry up close, its high walls carving a sharp line against the blue sky. The water below was dark, almost black, reflecting only slivers of light. Roberto cut the engine and turned to the back seat. His face had transformed entirely. The forced smile was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating mask. "Did you bring the money?" The question landed like a threat. Maria clutched her notebook to her chest, her heart beginning to race. Antonio instinctively reached for his shirt pocket, where his wallet held the down payment. "We brought it," the old man said, struggling to maintain his dignity. "But we want to see the land first." Roberto laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Land? What land? Did you really think I'd waste my time selling a plot of dirt to two old folks?" The truth crashed over the couple like a bucket of ice water. There was no land. There was no traveling owner named Lima. Roberto probably wasn't even this man's real name. They had walked into a trap, just as their daughter Helena had always warned them they might. "Listen, son," Antonio began, his voice trembling but still trying to sound firm. "We don't want any trouble. If there's no land, just take us home. We'll go our separate ways." Roberto got out of the car and walked to the rear right door, where Antonio sat. His eyes held a coldness that made Maria whisper a silent prayer, asking for protection for her husband and herself. "That's not how this works, Antonio. You know my name. You've seen my face. You've seen my car. If I let you go, you'll run straight to the police." Maria found her voice, though it was frail. "We promise. We won't say a word to anyone. We just want to go home. An old person's promise is worthless." Roberto pulled the door open and gestured for them to get out. Antonio hesitated. He looked at Maria and saw the terror etched on his wife's face. 60 years of marriage had taught them to understand each other without words. In that moment, they both knew they were in mortal danger. "Get out of the car, now!" There was no choice. Antonio stepped out first, his legs shaking slightly. Maria followed, clutching her blue notebook as if it were a protective talisman. The sun was strong, but she felt a deep chill. They walked a few yards until they stood near the edge of the quarry. From up here, the depth seemed even more terrifying. The dark water below revealed nothing of its bottom, reflecting only the clouds that drifted slowly across the sky. "The money," Roberto said, holding out his hand. With slow, deliberate movements as if each gesture might be his last, Antonio took the wallet from his pocket. The 3,500 reais were there, crisp notes of 50s and hundreds that he had so carefully withdrawn on Friday. Roberto snatched the money and counted it quickly. He stuffed the bills into his pocket and looked at the couple as if deciding their fate. "Please," Maria said, her voice barely a whisper. "We have a daughter. She needs us." "You've lived long enough. Longer than most." Roberto walked back to the car and started the engine. Antonio and Maria exchanged a look, not understanding what was happening. For a fleeting moment they thought he might just leave them there, lost in the wilderness. It would be terrible, but at least they would be alive. But that is not what happened. Roberto shifted into first gear and began to accelerate the goal directly toward them. Antonio grabbed Maria's arm, trying to pull her out of the way, but his 78-year-old reflexes were no match for the machine. The front bumper struck Antonio first, and he fell backward, taking Maria down with him. They rolled several feet across the dry earth, bruised and disoriented, but still conscious. The blue notebook flew from Maria's grasp, landing near a stone. Roberto stopped the car and got out again. Antonio tried to push himself up, a trickle of blood running from his forehead where it had hit a rock. Maria moaned softly, clutching her left arm, which she had twisted in the fall. "Why? Why are you doing this to us?" the old man asked, his voice strained with effort. Roberto didn't answer. He walked over to where Maria lay and picked up the blue notebook. He flipped through the pages, seeing her meticulous notes. Bills to pay, medical prescriptions, appointments. On the most recent page, he read his own description. Roberto Lima, realtor, land 15,000. He tossed the notebook into the car and returned to the couple on the ground. "You're getting back in the car, this time in the front." Antonio understood immediately. Roberto wanted it to look like an accident. Two elderly people out to see a piece of land, who lost control of their vehicle and plunged into the quarry. No one would question the story too deeply. Old people sometimes get confused, make poor decisions behind the wheel. "We don't know how to drive," Maria lied, a desperate last hope. "It doesn't matter. You won't be driving when the car hits the bottom." Roberto forced them to their feet and marched them to the goal. He opened the front doors and ordered them in. Antonio in the driver's seat, Maria in the passenger's. They obeyed in silence, knowing that resistance would only bring more violence. "Now, you two stay quiet while I get things organized." Roberto shut the doors and went to the back of the vehicle. Antonio looked at Maria and saw tears streaming down his wife's weathered face. 60 years together, a lifetime of honest work, a daughter raised with love, all to end like this at the hands of a criminal in the middle of nowhere. "I love you," he whispered, taking her hand. "I love you too, and I love our Helena." Those were the last words they exchanged as free people. Roberto opened the trunk and took out several large rocks he had collected along the way. He placed them on the rear floorboards to give the car more weight on its descent. Then he moved to the side of the vehicle and began to push it toward the quarry's edge. The goal was on a slight incline, and it didn't take much effort to get it rolling. The rear wheels moved from solid ground to empty air, and for a moment the car teetered on the brink as if hesitating before its final plunge. Antonio tried to scream, but no sound came out. Maria closed her eyes and quietly prayed the Our Father, the same prayer her mother had taught her as a child. The goal tipped forward and plummeted down the jagged walls of the quarry. It struck outcroppings of rock several times on the way down, the shriek of mangled metal echoing through the valley. When it finally hit the water, it made a dull thud, like a gargantuan sigh. Waves spread across the dark surface, rippling for a few minutes before settling back into silence. The car sank quickly, taking with it 2 bodies and a blue notebook that held 50 years of an honest family's memories. Roberto stood at the edge of the quarry for a few minutes, making sure the vehicle had completely submerged. When the surface of the water was calm again, he walked back down the dirt track to the main highway. There he hitched a ride with a trucker heading toward Campina Grande. The name Roberto Lima vanished along with the white goal. The man who had deceived Antonio and Maria was likely already using another identity, seeking other victims in other towns. At the abandoned quarry, the dark water returned to its silence. Small fish resumed swimming among the submerged rocks. The wind rustled the dry branches of the cacti on the cliffs above. Everything seemed normal, as if nothing had happened. But 60 feet below, a Volkswagen Gol rested crookedly between the boulders, with 2 skeletons in the front seats and a blue notebook that would endure the passage of time to one day tell the story of a perfect crime. Sunday arrived with the same strong sun as always, but the house on José de Alencar Street felt different. Helena had tried calling her parents the night before, as she always did on Saturdays, but no one had answered. She found it strange. Maria never let the phone ring, even when she was busy with her sewing. At 7 in the morning, Helena packed a bag and started the drive from Campina Grande to Boqueirão. The 60-kilometer journey had never felt so long. As she drove, she tried to find logical explanations for her parents' silence. Maybe they had gone to visit a relative, or perhaps the phone line was down. But deep in her heart, a knot of dread tightened with every passing kilometer. When she parked in front of the house, everything looked normal. The front door and windows were closed. The yard was tidy as always. Helena knocked several times before using the spare key she kept for emergencies. "Dad! Mom! Where are you?" Silence. The house was just as her parents always kept it. Clean, organized, everything in its place. But there were details that didn't fit with a planned absence. In the kitchen sink, a pot of beans was left to soak from the day before. The living room fan was still spinning. On her parents' bed, the clothes her father would have worn on Sunday were laid out on the quilt. Helena walked through every room, searching for a note, any kind of explanation. That's when she noticed some clothes were missing from the wardrobe. The beige shirt her father liked to wear when going out, and her mother's light blue dress, the one with white buttons she saved for special occasions. And on the nightstand, the blue notebook her mother carried everywhere was gone. Helena's stomach churned. Her parents had left dressed for some kind of appointment, but they hadn't come back. And stranger still, they didn't own a car. How had they left? She ran next door to her neighbor's house, where Donna Francisca was in the kitchen preparing lunch. "Donna Francisca, did you see my parents yesterday?" The neighbor wiped her hands on her apron, her face creased with concern at the panic in Helena's voice. "I did, my dear. They left early, around 9 in the morning. They got into a white car with a man I didn't recognize." "What do you mean? What man?" "A younger man, well-dressed. They seemed happy when they got in the car. Your father even waved to me and shouted that he'd be back before lunch." Helena felt her legs grow weak. Her parents didn't know anyone with a white car. They would never leave with a stranger without telling her. "Do you remember anything else? The car, the man?" Donna Francisca thought for a moment. "The car was a bit old, a white Gol with some rust spots. The man looked to be about 40, wearing a light-colored shirt. He seemed polite, but he wasn't from around here. I'd never seen him before." A chill ran down Helena's spine. A stranger had taken her parents away, and they hadn't returned. Something was terribly wrong. "Donna Francisca, did you hear them say anything about where they were going?" "I didn't hear clearly, dear. But your father seemed excited. He said something about a plot of land." Land. Helena remembered the conversation from the week before, when her parents had mentioned wanting to buy a small property. They had promised her they would be careful, that they wouldn't rush into anything. She ran back to her parents' house and searched every room for clues. In her mother's sewing room, she found scraps of fabric scattered on the machine, as if Maria had been interrupted mid-task. On the kitchen table sat 2 half-empty cups of cold coffee. It was then that Helena noticed something that worried her even more. The brown leather wallet her father always carried was nowhere to be found. And in the drawer where her mother kept important documents, the couple's IDs and tax numbers were missing. They had left prepared to close some kind of official deal. Helena picked up the phone and called the Boqueirão police station. The chief, Moisés Ferreira, had known her since she was a child. He had been a schoolmate of her father's decades ago. "Chief, I need to report my parents missing. They left yesterday morning with an unknown man and haven't come back." "Calm down, Helena. I'll send a car over right now. You haven't touched anything in the house, have you?" "I just looked for clues. There are some strange things here." An hour later, 2 police officers were at the house, listening to Helena's and Donna Francisca's accounts. They noted the description of the white gold and the unknown man. They confirmed the couple had taken their documents and most likely a large sum of money. "It could be a scam," Sergeant Raimundo said. "There are plenty of crooks out there preying on the elderly." "Did they mention anything about buying land?" Helena confirmed they had, but had promised to be cautious. "We'll patrol the area, check the gas stations, the main roads. Someone must have seen that white gold." But the initial searches revealed nothing. No gas station attendant in the region had seen a car matching the description. No one living along the rural roads remembered seeing Antônio and Maria. It was as if they had simply vanished from the face of the earth. On Monday, Helena couldn't work. She called the hospital in Campina Grande to request time off and decided to search for her parents herself. She drove all over the region, stopping at farms and small holdings, asking everyone she met. No one had seen a thing. That's when she remembered the abandoned quarry on the outskirts of town. It was a place that had always frightened her as a child, a deep crater filled with dark water surrounded by signs warning of the danger. A few reckless youths would sometimes go there to dive, but most locals avoided the place. Helena drove there late on a Monday afternoon. She parked on the edge of the dirt road and walked to the rim of the old excavation. The water was calm, reflecting a sky that was beginning to darken. There were no signs of movement, no evidence that anyone had been there recently. Still, she shouted, "Dad! Mom! Are you there?" Only the echo of her own voice returned from the stone walls. Helena stood there for almost an hour, staring into that dark, mysterious water. Something inside her said this place held answers, but she couldn't imagine what they might be. When she finally returned home, she found Delegate Moisés waiting at her door. He wore the grave expression of someone bearing bad news. "Helena, we checked the bank where your parents have their account. Antonio withdrew 3,500 reais on Friday morning, in cash." The information confirmed Helena's worst fears. Her parents had been victims of some kind of scam. Someone had convinced them to leave home with a considerable amount of money, and now they had simply vanished. "What do we do now, Delegate?" "We're intensifying the search. I've already sent a bulletin to other precincts in the region. If they're in a hospital or if someone has seen them, we'll know." But Helena was certain her parents weren't in any hospital. They weren't lost on some road. Someone had done them harm, and she knew she might never see them alive again. The weeks following Antônio and Maria's disappearance were a blur of desperate hope and mounting despair. Helena had taken an extended leave from the hospital and was practically living between Boqueirão and Campina Grande. coordinating the search and following any lead that emerged. Delegate Moises established an investigation that included patrols on rural roads, checks at hospitals throughout the region, and interviews with local merchants. The description of the white goal was broadcast on local radio, and posters with the couple's photos were plastered in markets, pharmacies, and at bus stops. The first concrete lead emerged on a rainy Wednesday in February. A gas station attendant on the outskirts of Campina Grande called the precinct, saying he remembered seeing a white goal with rust spots on the Saturday of the disappearance. "It stopped here around 10:30 in the morning," he'd said. "Only the driver got out, a man around 40 wearing a light-colored shirt, bought cigarettes and a soda. I didn't see who was in the car, but I could tell there were people in the back seat." Helena's heart hammered in her chest when the delegate told her. It was the first confirmation that her parents were indeed in that car, that they had been alive at least until 10:30 on Saturday morning. "Does the attendant remember anything else? Which way did the car go?" "He said it headed inland, took the road towards Montero in that area." Montero. Helena remembered it was the town where her father had been born, where he'd spent his childhood before the family moved to Boqueirão. Had the scammer discovered this information and used it to convince Antonio to go with him? The police intensified their search in that region. They checked every rural property within a 50-kilometer radius. They spoke with old-timers who might have known the Sequeira family decades ago. But nothing was found. 15 days after the disappearance, a second clue surfaced. A farmer from the Montero area called to say he had found a brown leather wallet on a dirt road near his property. Helena recognized it immediately. It was her father's. Inside were his ID, social security card, and a few other cards, but no money. The wallet was caked in dirt as if it had been deliberately thrown there. "Does this mean they made it to Montero?" Helena asked the delegate. "Or did someone want us to think they did? It could be an attempt to mislead the investigation." The area where the wallet was found was scoured for days. Police, firefighters, and local volunteers combed every meter of woods, every reservoir, every abandoned building. A civil police helicopter flew over the region, conducting aerial searches. Nothing was found but the wallet. Meanwhile, Helena's life had been turned upside down. She was practically living at her parents' house in Boqueirão, leaving only to follow the search or give interviews to local newspapers, pleading for information about the couple. The house on José de Alencar Street became a sort of operations center. Neighbors brought food, family friends helped with calls to radio stations and newspapers. And Helena kept a notebook where she jotted down every clue, every piece of information, every theory about what could have happened to her parents. But as the months passed, the leads grew scarcer. The police continued to conduct occasional patrols, but newer cases began to take priority. The white goal was never found. The man who had introduced himself as Roberto Lima seemed to have vanished from the face of the earth, along with Antônio and Maria. Refusing to give up, Helena hired a private detective with what little money she had managed to save, but even he couldn't get any further than the police. She spoke with psychics, with anyone who claimed to have some insight into the case. Every lead went nowhere. In December of 2006, nearly a year after the disappearance, Helena made a difficult decision. She returned to work at the hospital in Campina Grande, not because she had given up on finding her parents, but because she needed to survive financially to continue the search. Every weekend she still went to Boqueirão. She kept her parents' house exactly as they had left it, as if they might return at any moment. She continued to distribute posters, talk to people, and follow any new clue that emerged. But in her heart, Helena knew her parents were dead. The question that tormented her was, Where were the bodies? Why had someone gone to such lengths to hide them so well? The answer to those questions lay just a few kilometers away, at the bottom of an abandoned quarry where the dark water held secrets that would only be revealed years later, when nature itself decided to tell the truth. The years passed slowly for Helena, each one bringing a little less hope and a little more resignation. 2007, 2008, 2009. The house in Boqueirão remained preserved like a sanctuary, visited religiously every weekend by the daughter who refused to accept she would never see her parents again. In 2010, 4 years after the disappearance, Helena made a heart-wrenching choice. She officially moved to Campina Grande and began visiting Boqueirão only once a month. The routine of maintaining 2 houses had become financially unsustainable, and she needed to rebuild her life. But she never stopped searching. With each passing year, Helena developed a new strategy. In 2011, she created a profile on Orkut with photos of her parents and details of their disappearance. In 2012, when Facebook reached the interior of Paraíba, she migrated there, creating groups and pages dedicated to the case. She sent messages to television shows, wrote to national newspapers. The story of Antônio and Maria appeared a few times on talk shows in segments dedicated to missing persons. Helena always participated by phone, her voice choked with emotion as she repeated the same details. An elderly couple, a white goal, a man claiming to be a real estate agent, a 3,500 real down payment. A few false leads surfaced over the years. In 2013, a woman from Recife claimed to have seen a couple resembling Antônio and Maria living in a shanty town. Helena took a bus there, but they were 2 completely different people. In 2014, a man imprisoned in João Pessoa claimed to know who had killed the couple. But when the police investigated, they discovered he was inventing stories to try to negotiate a better deal for himself. Each false lead was a blow to Helena's heart, but she continued to investigate everyone no matter how improbable it seemed. By 2015, 9 years after the disappearance, Helena was 47, living a life completely different from the one she had planned. She was still working as a nursing assistant but had never married or had children. All her emotional energy was focused on the search for her parents. It was January when one of the most severe droughts ever recorded in the region began. Reservoirs dropped drastically and rivers shriveled into trickles of water. The relentless sun cracked the earth and killed cattle in the parched pastures. Helena followed the news about the drought with professional interest. But she never imagined that this particular drought would change her life forever. In June of 2015, a 12-year-old boy named João Vitor was exploring the area around the abandoned quarry near Boqueirão. The water, which normally sat about 5 meters from the top edge, had receded so much that you could see rock formations at the bottom that had never before been exposed. João Vitor and his friends used to go to the quarry to throw rocks into the water, even though they knew it was forbidden. That day he was alone and decided to climb down the steep slope to get a closer look at the strange rocks that had appeared. That's when he saw something that sent him running home, screaming. In the middle of the rocks, half buried in the dried sludge at the bottom of the quarry, was what looked like a car. An old car completely covered in rust and mud, but definitely a car. João Vitor told his parents, who at first didn't believe him. But the boy insisted so much that his father, José Roberto, decided to go see for himself. And that's when the discovery changed everything. José Roberto confirmed there was indeed a vehicle at the bottom of the quarry. He immediately called the Boqueirão police. Within an hour, a team of officers was at the edge of the old excavation, looking down, trying to understand how a car had ended up there. Delegate Moises, the same man who had coordinated the search for Antonio and Maria 9 years earlier, was retired, but when he heard about the discovery, he went to the site on his own. When he saw the shape of the car down below, a compact sedan with a boxy rear, a shiver ran down his spine. "It looks like a goal," he said to the new delegate. "An old goal." And that's when he remembered the elderly couple who had disappeared 9 years earlier, getting into a white goal with an unknown man. The news of the discovery reached Helena on a Tuesday morning, in a phone call she would never forget. It was the new delegate from Boqueirão informing her that a car had been found at the bottom of the quarry and that they wanted her to come and see if she recognized anything. Helena felt her legs go weak. 9 years searching for any trace of her parents. And now a car had appeared in the exact town where they had disappeared. It couldn't be a coincidence. She took leave from work and drove straight to Boqueirão. When she arrived at the quarry, she found a commotion she hadn't seen there in decades. Firefighters, police, curious townspeople, reporters from local stations, all of them staring into the crater where, among the rocks and dried mud, the rusted silhouette of a car was exposed for the first time in nearly a decade. "It's hard to see from up here," the delegate told Helena, "but from the headlights and the shape of the rear, it really does look like a goal, a 90s model." Helena gripped the protective railing that had been installed around the quarry and strained her eyes. The car was tilted at a strange angle, the front lower than the back, as if it had fallen from a great height. The original color was impossible to determine because of the rust and mud, but the shape was unmistakable. "When will you be able to get it out of there?" "The firefighters from Campina Grande are bringing special equipment. It should arrive by late afternoon. Winches, steel cables, that sort of thing. It won't be easy. The car is heavy with mud and water." Helena spent the entire day at the edge of the quarry watching the preparations. She ate only a sandwich a neighbor brought her. She drank water when someone offered, but she couldn't tear herself away. She was certain that car held the answers she had been seeking for 9 years. Late that afternoon, the firefighters arrived with the heavy equipment. They rappelled down to the water's edge and managed to attach steel cables to the vehicle's chassis. The work was slow and dangerous. The bottom of the quarry was uneven, full of loose rocks and slippery mud. When they finally began to hoist the car, Helena held tight to the railing, her heart pounding so hard it ached in her chest. With every meter the vehicle rose, it became clearer that it was indeed a boxy goal, a model from the 90s. And as the water streamed from its broken windows and shattered body, Helena began to distinguish a color beneath the rust. White. It was a white goal. When the car finally reached the surface, Helena could no longer contain herself. She began to sob uncontrollably, clutching the delegate's arm to keep from falling. That was the car that had taken her parents away 9 years ago. She was absolutely sure, but what shattered her most wasn't recognizing the vehicle. It was seeing what was inside, through the rear window partially destroyed by rust and the years underwater. It was possible to make out two shapes in the back seat. Shapes that were not seats nor equipment. They were human skeletons side by side in the exact position where Donna Francisca had seen Antonio and Maria get in the car that January Saturday. "My parents," Helena whispered, her voice a raw, broken sound. "It's them. It's my parents." The firefighters immediately cordoned off the area. No one else could approach the car until the forensics team arrived, but Helena no longer needed official confirmation. She recognized the position of the bodies, the way they were seated next to each other. Antonio and Maria had spent 9 years at the bottom of that quarry, inside the same car that had carried them away from home on a sunny January morning. The delegate tried to convince Helena to go home, promising she would be the first to know of any developments. But she refused to leave. She spent the night in a plastic chair someone had brought, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, her gaze fixed on the rusted Volkswagen Gol. The following morning, the forensics team from João Pessoa arrived. Photographers, medical examiners, traffic accident experts. They all approached the car with caution, documenting every detail before moving a single thing. It was then, on the rear floorboard of the Gol, amidst the debris and rust, they found an object that made Helena weep even harder. It was the blue hardcover notebook with the elastic band. The same notebook Maria carried everywhere, where she jotted down everything she considered important. It was waterlogged, its pages stuck together by time and water, but it was still recognizable. And on the last page, something was still legible. In the small, neat handwriting that Helena knew so well, it read, Saturday, 28, Zé Urion, visit land with realtor, 9 o'clock, bring down payment, 3,500 reais. It was the last note Maria das Dores had ever written, the definitive proof that these were indeed Antonio and Maria, and that they had been victims of a scam that cost them far more than money. The official forensic report confirmed what Helena already knew in her heart. The skeletons found in the Gol belonged to a man and a woman, both elderly with ages consistent with Antonio and Maria Siqueira. DNA samples were collected for final confirmation. But the personal items found in the car, Maria's notebook, fragments of the leather wallet that belonged to Antonio, and even buttons from the blue dress she was wearing the day she disappeared, left no room for doubt. The report revealed disturbing details about the couple's final moments. The bodies were in the passenger seats, not in the driver and front passenger positions. This confirmed they were not driving when the car entered the quarry. Fractures found on the skeletons indicated that both had suffered injuries before hitting the water, possibly from a physical assault. More importantly, there were no signs they had tried to escape the vehicle as it sank. The bodies remained seated side by side as if they were already unconscious or dead when the car was pushed into the quarry. The medical examiner, Dr. Edmundo Cavalcante, explained to Helena that, given the position of the skeletons and the absence of any struggle inside the car, it was likely her parents had been killed before the vehicle reached the water. Drowning was not the cause of death. It was merely the method used to hide the bodies. They didn't suffer in the water, the doctor said, trying to offer some comfort. They were likely no longer conscious when it happened. News of the discovery spread quickly through local newspapers and television programs. Elderly couple found dead after 9 years missing was the headline in the Jornal da Paraíba. TV stations from João Pessoa and Campina Grande sent crews to cover the story. Helena gave several interviews, always repeating the same details about the man who introduced himself as Roberto Lima, the white Gol, the promise of cheap land. She hoped the media exposure would help identify the killer, but she knew that after 9 years, the chances were minimal. The investigation was officially reopened, now as a double homicide. The new delegate, Carlos Medeiros, assembled a task force to try and identify the man known as Roberto Lima. They checked registries of real estate agents, property records for the region, databases of convicts, and police archives. Nothing was found. Roberto Lima, if that was even his real name, had vanished as completely as his victims. There were no photos of him, no fingerprints, no paper trail. The only available description was Dona Francisca's, and after 9 years the details were muddled in the elderly neighbor's memory. During excavations around the car, forensics found other objects that helped reconstruct the couple's final moments. Large stones in the trunk of the Gol, placed there intentionally to make the vehicle sink faster. Fragments of clothing confirmed that Antonio was wearing his favorite beige shirt, and Maria had on her special occasion blue dress. And something that disturbed Helena more than any other piece of evidence. Tire tracks and markings in the soil around the quarry indicated that the car had been pushed by someone from the outside. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a suicide. It was a premeditated murder, carefully planned to look like an unexplained disappearance. The inquiry remained open for 6 months, but with no new leads or witnesses, it was archived again in December of 2015. The public prosecutor acknowledged that despite clear evidence of homicide, there was not enough information to identify or prosecute the person responsible. Helena organized her parents' funeral in January 2016, exactly 10 years after their disappearance. It was a simple ceremony at the main church in Boqueirão, attended by old neighbors, a few of Antonio's former colleagues from his railroad days, and nurses from the hospital where Helena worked. The caskets were closed. After 9 years underwater, there was nothing left to bury but bones. But Helena made a point of placing on each casket an object that represented them. Antonio's straw hat and Maria's blue notebook, finally dry after months in the hands of the forensics team. During the Mass, the priest offered a special prayer for the victims of human wickedness and asked God to forgive the killer, wherever he might be. Helena could not bring herself to repeat that part of the prayer. In her heart, she still hoped that one day justice would be served. After the funeral, she sold the house on José de Alencar Street. She could no longer enter those rooms without seeing the ghosts of her parents, without remembering all the weekends she had spent there, searching for answers that were just a few kilometers away at the bottom of a quarry. With the money from the sale, Helena bought a small apartment in Campina Grande and tried to start her life over at the age of 51. But she would forever carry the image of the rusted goal emerging from the murky water, bringing with it the truth about Antonio and Maria's fate. A truth that had come too late for justice, but at least brought an end to the uncertainty that had tormented a daughter for nearly a decade. In the years that followed, Helena tried to rebuild her life, but she discovered that living with the answers was almost as difficult as living with the questions. Now she knew exactly what had happened to her parents. She knew their final moments, but the sense of injustice consumed her. Roberto Lima was still out there, possibly preying on other victims, living a normal life while Antonio and Maria had rotted at the bottom of a quarry. This certainty stole Helena's sleep and made her question if discovering the truth had been worth it. In 2017, 2 years after the discovery of the bodies, Helena received a call that rekindled her hope for justice. It was an investigator from the civil police in João Pessoa, informing her that a man arrested for fraud had mentioned knowledge of the case of the couple from Boqueirão. Helena took the first bus to the capital. At the police station, she met Marcos Antonio Silva, a 52-year-old man with an extensive criminal record for scams targeting the elderly. He claimed to have information about Roberto Lima but wanted to negotiate a reduced sentence in exchange. "I knew that guy," Marcos told Helena, looking directly into her eyes. "His real name wasn't Roberto Lima. It was Josué Ferreira Santos. We worked together on a few scams around 2005, 2006. Helena's heart pounded in her chest. Finally, after more than 10 years, someone knew who had actually killed her parents. "Where is he now?" Marcos shook his head, an expression of mixed regret and caution on his face. "That's the bad part of the story. Josué died in 2009, motorcycle accident on a road between Recife and Caruaru. He was running from another scam that went wrong. Cops were after him. He lost control on a curve." Helena felt as if she had been punched in the gut. Her parents' killer had been dead for 6 years, and she had never known. There would be no trial, no prison, no satisfaction of seeing him pay for what he did. "How did you run the scams?" she asked. trying to at least understand the method. Josue had a silver tongue, dressed well, made up stories about cheap land, rural properties, always targeted elderly folks who had a little money saved up. I stayed on the sidelines, just helped with the planning. Marcos explained that Josue used to frequent street fairs and markets, listening to conversations, identifying potential victims. When he found someone interested in buying land, he would approach them days later pretending to be a realtor. Did he kill anyone else besides my parents? Not that I know of. Josue wasn't violent. He preferred to just take the money and leave the victims stranded somewhere far away. But with your parents, it was different. Why? Marcos was silent for a few seconds, clearly uncomfortable. Because your father recognized him. Helena didn't understand at first. What do you mean? Josue told me about it later. He said when they got to the quarry, the old man started talking about how he'd known a Josue Ferreira back in Montero decades ago. He started making connections, remembering the family. Josue panicked. He thought he was going to be found out. The revelation was a knife to Helena's heart. Her father had died because his good memory had identified his killer. If he had just stayed quiet, perhaps they both would have survived the scam. And then Josue lost his mind. He hit them both with a rock, threw them in the car and pushed it into the quarry. Afterwards, he was haunted by what he'd done, started drinking heavily, doing drugs. That's when we went our separate ways. Helena absorbed the information in silence. Now she had the killer's real name. She knew how it had happened. She understood why her parents had been murdered instead of just robbed. But none of it brought relief. Josue Ferreira Santos had been dead for years, buried in some cemetery in Pernambuco as just another traffic accident statistic. He had never paid for what he did to Antônio and Maria. He never even knew their bodies had been found in the following months. Helena tried to track down information about Josue. She discovered that he had indeed been born in Montero around the same time her father lived there. They had likely known each other as children or teenagers, which explained the fatal recognition. She found Josue's family, a sister living in Campina Grande and a few nieces and nephews. They confirmed he had gotten involved with drugs and crime in his youth and had died in an accident in 2009, but they knew nothing of the details of his criminal life. Helena considered telling them what Josue had done, but decided against it. The man was dead. His family had suffered too. Adding more pain to that story wouldn't bring her parents back. In 2018, 12 years after Antônio and Maria's disappearance, Helena made a decision that surprised even herself. She forgave Josue Ferreira Santos, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because carrying so much hatred was destroying her own life. One Sunday afternoon, she went to the cemetery where her parents were buried and spoke to them as she always did. She told them she had discovered the killer's name, that he was dead, that he would never pay for his crime. And she told them she was trying to move on. "You didn't deserve to die like that," she said, arranging the flowers on their grave. "But I can't spend the rest of my life being angry. I need to live for the family we were, not for the sadness he caused." It was the first time in over a decade that Helena left the cemetery without crying. That same year, she met a widower named João Carlos, who also worked at the hospital. He had lost his wife to cancer 5 years earlier and understood what it was like to rebuild a life after a devastating loss. They began dating slowly, carefully, respecting each other's scars. Helena had never married or had children, but in him she found a kind of peace she had thought impossible. She continued to visit her parents' grave every month, but now she told them about good things. Her work at the hospital, her plans with João Carlos, the small joys of daily life. The story of Antônio and Maria Siqueira became a sad legend in Boqueirão. The quarry was finally closed by municipal authorities, surrounded by a high fence and signs warning of the danger. But everyone in town knew it wasn't just about the risk of drowning. It was to honor the memory of the couple who had died there. Helena turned 55 in March of 2024, and for the first time since her parents' death, she was able to celebrate her birthday without sorrow. João Carlos organized a small party in their apartment. They had decided to move in together 2 years prior, with a few colleagues from the hospital and close neighbors. 18 years had passed since that January Saturday when Antônio and Maria left home to see a piece of land. 13 years since the drought had revealed the rusted gold at the bottom of the quarry. And 6 years since Helena had learned the real name of her parents' killer. Time had softened the sharpest edges of grief, but it had not erased the memory of the couple nor the significance of their story. Helena still received occasional messages from people who had seen her television interviews or read about the case in the papers. Some were from families with missing relatives of their own, asking for advice on how to keep searching. Others came from elderly people wanting to share stories of similar scams they had narrowly escaped. Each message reinforced for Helena that her parents' story had not been in vain. Every time someone became more vigilant because of what had happened to Antônio and Maria. Every time a family avoided a similar scheme, their deaths took on a meaning that transcended personal tragedy. In June of 2024, an emotional phone call came. It was a documentary producer from São Paulo asking if Helena would participate in a film about crimes against the elderly in Brazil. The case of Antônio and Maria would be one of the central stories. Helena accepted immediately. Not for 15 minutes of fame. She had given enough interviews to know that brought no lasting satisfaction. She agreed for the chance to warn more people about the dangers the elderly face when scammers prey on their good faith. During filming that August in Boqueirão, Helena returned to the old quarry for the first time in years. Now fenced off and marked with warning signs, the site was dry once again due to another drought. The bottom, where the car had rested for 9 years, was clearly visible. My parents were not naive people, Helena told the cameras standing at the edge of the pit. They knew there was evil in the world, but they possessed the inherent trust of a generation that believed in a person's word, and that is exactly what Josué Ferreira exploited. The documentary was released in late 2024 and gained national attention. Helena appeared on television programs, spoke at social work conferences, and gave talks to senior citizen groups, always carrying the same message. Beware of proposals that seem too good to be true. Distrust strangers offering business deals. And always talk with your family before making financial decisions. During one of these talks, in Campina Grande, an 80-year-old woman approached Helena afterward. "My dear," she said, "my husband and I almost fell for the exact same scam last year. A man came to our house offering cheap land, but I remembered your parents' story from the television. I told him, no, sir, we don't do business with strangers. We saved our little bit of money." With tears in her eyes, Helena hugged the woman. This was why she told her parents' story tirelessly, so that other families would not have to endure what hers had. In December of 2024, on the 19th anniversary of Antônio and Maria's death, Helena organized a small ceremony at the cemetery in Boqueirão. Besides her husband, João Carlos, a few old neighbors were there, along with some of her father's former colleagues from his days on the railroad. And there was a special surprise, João Vitor, the boy who had discovered the car in the quarry, now a 21-year-old engineering student. "Helena," the young man said, "I've never forgotten that morning. Knowing that I helped your family find the truth, it changed my life. I hope your parents are at peace." Helena smiled, looking at the fresh flowers they had placed on the grave. Yellow roses, her mother's favorite, and white carnations, which her father always bought for their wedding anniversaries. "They are at peace," she replied, "and their story will continue to help others. It's the best gift I can give them." When everyone else had gone and silence settled over the cemetery, Helena remained for a few more minutes, as she always did. She told her parents about the documentary, about the people who had been warned away from scams, about João Carlos and their plans for the coming year. 19 years later, she said softly, "I still miss you every single day. But I've learned that the best way to honor your memory is to make sure your story saves other families. Every person who becomes wiser because of what happened to you, that is our victory." The wind rustled the leaves of the trees, and Helena imagined it was her parents' answer, a whisper of approval for all she had done to transform a tragedy into a shield for others. She went home in peace, knowing that Antonio Siqueira and Maria das Dores had not died in vain. Their deaths had become a permanent warning about the dangers that prey on the most vulnerable, and their daughter would continue to tell their story as long as she had a voice. If this story has touched you, and you know elderly people who may be at risk, please share it. Subscribe and activate notifications for more stories that deserve to be heard. And do not forget to warn your parents and grandparents. Always be suspicious of strangers offering deals that are too good to be true. Some offers cost far more than money. They cost entire lives.